Welcome to a journey of voices, data and progress as we mark the conclusion of Afrobarometer's Round 9 survey. It was an incredible adventure, a journey that began in 2021 with dedicated enumerators working tirelessly in diverse terrains across 39 African countries. These unsung heroes are the backbone of Afrobarometer's mission, laying the foundation for our Round 9 surveys.
Afrobarometer has been conducting these surveys since 1999, and this was the 9th iteration of the surveys. And it is part of our mission to make sure that citizen voice is part of public discourse. For the first time, we're able to cover up to 39 countries on the continent since we started these surveys in 1999, so that was a big highlight. The second is that within a calendar year, 12 months, we were able to complete more than 30 surveys. This was also a record for us because we've never been able to complete up to 30 surveys in one calendar year. And our visibility increased several hundred percentage folds.
I don't know if people are aware that our country is called the kingdom in the sky because it's very mountainous, so the terrain is very difficult. But it doesn't matter how far it is, how difficult it is, we always endeavor to get where we are supposed to get. Usually the proudest moment is actually getting the data, getting the results, and getting to share them, to really get the people to know what Basotho think about issues which are very important to them.
Diversity is a part of our values, and we are committed to having diverse interviewers, diversity of languages into which we translate surveys and data, and of course, ensuring that we cover as many countries as we can in our diverse continent.
In terms of diversity and inclusivity, Afrobarometer makes a deliberate policy that requires all our national partners to make sure that at least 40% of their field workers are women. And in some cases, actually, we have more than 50% of the field workers that are women. In terms of our samples, again, Afrobarometer has a deliberate policy that 50% of our samples will be women and 50% will be men. And in terms of coverage, national coverage, because the samples are nationally representative, so it means that in each country the sample is distributed based on the population that is in rural or urban areas in proportion to the population.
My name is Seth Matijau. I am the Executive Director, Center for Research and Policy Development. They have been the national investigator for Afrobarometer in the Gambia since 2010.
And we are here to have the first public release of findings from the Afrobarometer, the 10th one since 1999. CDD has been engaged and then has been engaging citizens across the country to have their insight into what are of importance to them in relation to 3 major blocks. So this year, we had the 10th one, and as I said, we are here to have the public one. My name is Joyce Nyame. I work with the Youth Foundation, and I will be moderating the event for today. So I think we all have the agenda. We'll go straight to the agenda, and then, as I said, we apologize for the late start. I would like to call on Dr. Kojo Asante, the Director of Policy, Engagement and Partnerships here at CDD-Ghana, to give us the welcome remarks.
All right. Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. And let me welcome you on behalf of the governing board, management, and staff of CDD-Ghana and to today's event. As Joyce has said, we will be sharing with you findings from Afrobarometer Round 10 survey. As you know, the Afrobarometer has over 100 questions. So today's release will be on focus on trust in institutions, corruption, and elections. Now, CDD-Ghana is very proud to be a founding core partner, and also proud to have incubated the Afrobarometer for the first 20 years of his life until it became a standalone organization in 2019. As the Ghana national partner since 1999, we are glad to be able to share with you again national views on democracy, governance, economy, and society, among others. Now, the essence of the Afrobarometer is to give the people a voice, to have a say, so that those who are entrusted with state resources and power would hear them and adjust their decision making accordingly. Of course, in a few weeks, we will be going to the polls, and so the people's voice is even more important, at least in two ways. It is going to be critical in helping those who are going to prepare us for elections, all the key stakeholders that are trying to make sure that we deliver free, fair, peaceful elections, that everything is put in place, and we want to hear how the people are feeling as they prepare for the elections, but also in shaping the public discourse for those vying for public office, so that they will also listen to them and be able to inform the choices that they are putting before the people. And finally, to say that let me take this opportunity to appreciate the Afrobarometer and its consortium of founders. Also a big appreciation to the GIZ who supported the Ghana survey. And we're really grateful for this support. This will allow us to do some analysis also at the regional level, and really grateful for that. Lastly, a big thank you to the Ghana Statistical Service who have been helping us with the sampling over the years, and really appreciate them. I hope they are here. And with those few words, we look forward to the engagement, and you are very welcome again to CDD-Ghana. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kojo, for the welcome remarks. Now that we've been welcomed into the space, I would like us to observe these house rules. So this event is being recorded, and then we are also live on social media. We are live on Facebook, and we are live on YouTube at CDD Ghana. If you are joining us online, you can leave a comment or any question in the comment section, and then we will read it. For those online and those who are here and are on social media, we are using these hashtags. Hashtag Ghana Elections 2024, hashtag corruption, hashtag Voices Africa. Hashtag Ghana Elections 2024, hashtag corruption, and hashtag Voices Africa. According to the program, we are to receive the presentations from the consultants who did the most of the survey. So may we now bring up the doctor to help us with that.
Good afternoon. And just to correct it, I'm not a consultant. I'm the director of research here at CDD Ghana, although I'd love to be a consultant. So thank you. I receive it. Okay, so before we get to the business of the day, I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge my team that has worked tirelessly over the past 2 weeks to get us where we are today. I'd like to mention first our team lead, Mavis Domi, if you can just give a wave. Daniel Amato, Lionel Esima, where are you? Francisca Sapon, Mamie Piachum, and Chitam Mingle. Thank you all very much. So as Kojos has said, this is the 10th round of the Afrobarometer survey. And of course, CDD started doing this in 1999. And this is the 25th anniversary of Afrobarometer collecting citizens' views. And it's actually landmark. And for Ghana, this is our 10th round of conducting Afrobarometer surveys. As they say, it's a decade and it's important. And so a lot of what I'll be sharing today would show you trends over time so that we see the progress of how far we've come with some of the views we've collected from citizens over time. Now, before we get into all of that, I would like to say a few more words about the Afrobarometer, because just in case Kojo didn't cover all of it, and for those who don't know much about it. It's a Pan-African non-partisan survey enterprise. The goal is to give voice to the public and also inform policy and decision making. Like I said, this is the 10th round of the Afrobarometer survey. There's a nice map that is always shown to show where Afrobarometer has covered in Africa. And so all of the colored parts that you see are countries in which Afrobarometer has conducted at least one survey. And the middle portion, which shows gray, are the areas where Afrobarometer has not done a survey. And I hope that in a few years to come, would have covered the whole of Africa. I'll now move on to the methodology. Of course, our methodology has not changed from 1999 when we started. It has remained the same. Of course, that helps us, compare, like I said, and see the trends. We use what we call a nationally representative sample of adult citizens. Now, what I always say is that this sort of survey is not a census. So not everyone is expected to be interviewed. So we take a sample of adult citizens of that population. Face-to-face interviews are conducted. And for those of you who came earlier, there were some pictures and videos that were screening on the screen, and it shows you what we go through to ask questions. So wherever the sample throws us, whether it's overseas, as they say, we go there. Sometimes over very treacherous, conditions, bad roads and all of that. And it helps us see and appreciate some of the problems of this country. And when citizens give us their opinion, it really counts. All right, our sample size is 2,400 of the adult population size. We've been using the sample size for the past, since round 5. The margin of error on that sample size is plus or minus 2 percentage points with a confidence interval of 95%. The data we're about to share with you was collected between 5th August and 22nd August of this year, 2024, an election year and an auspicious one as such. All right, so you already have seen the survey demographics on the screen. And, I'm usually very proud of what you see in the blue part, the last column, which is the distribution of our sample over the 16 regions. Of course, our sample covers all of the 16 regions of Ghana. It covers, it's spread across both rural and urban areas. Now, the middle column is what our national census gives us as a distribution across the regions. And ours is what you see in blue. And as you can see, and I can proudly say that it mirrors what we see in our national census. All right, this map again shows you the spread of our sample. Can you change the slide? Yeah. So those dots you see shows the spread of where we conducted our interviews, and the dots represent the EAs. In sampling, EA is the smallest unit. So the dots will represent 8 interviews in each of those EAs in the dots. And as you can see, where there's a lot of concentration, of course, the population is higher and that sort of thing. So that's how much our survey is spread. Now, our survey, our sample also covers the social demographics of Ghana. it's a broad spectrum of, the genders, education, and religion. And it does cover employment status and that sort of thing, but we're just showing these for now because, some of the cross-tabulation we've done with the demographics will show these, and that's why we are focusing on this. And then just a small point about why we see 50-50 in the gender. We deliberately do what we call alternation of selection of respondents. So if we interview a man in a household, the next household will be a woman. That's how come we're able to get a split in the sample like that. All right, so one of the things we learned early on when we were collecting Afrobarometer data and presenting to the public was that contextualizing, findings is important. And how do we get that? And we usually get that from, the news, because we recognize that opinions are formed from what people hear, what people talk about, what they hear in the media and read online. And I must put a caveat in here that we do not gather news from social media sources because sometimes you have to fact check those. So what we will present in terms of the context is collected from newspapers and recognized online news portals. Now, this is also important because, sometimes when we share findings like this, you need to keep, going back to why a particular respondent would have said something. And sometimes it's hidden in some of the discussions that we were having at the time that the data was being collected. So I'll share a few of that with you. So on governance issues, of course, the EC was in the news a whole lot. So this covers January up to August. So the EC was definitely in the news a lot. Concerns about the voter register, what method to use to identify who should be in the voter register was in the news. Of course, the vexed issue of the LGBTQ legislation was also in the news. The two major political parties, the MPP and NDC, launched their manifestos. Campaign activities picked up with the political parties and some of the independent candidates as well. On the economic front, of course, we all know about the IMF bailout. We had then received the second tranche that was in the news. There was also concerns over the rising cost of fuel and food prices and that sort of thing. We got a Moody's credit upgrade somewhere in between. There was news about youth unemployment, and then all kinds of initiatives were being introduced to alleviate that. Now on corruption issues, of course, there were high-profile corruption cases that came to light. Also, the Auditor General's report also highlighted some issues. There were allegations of interference in the Office of Special Prosecutors. There was some so-called political interference in there. Of course, civil society like us, were up in arms against about that. Then on issues regarding infrastructure and service delivery, and I will hold this slide for a while because we are sharing with you findings on trust, corruption, and the elections today. Next week, we will share findings on some other topics where this actually comes really into play. So I will skip it for a while, but just take a look at it, as some of these things were in the news. And I'll now begin to move closely to the findings. Now, as has been said by the moderator and Kojo, we are looking at trust in institutions. We are going to look at perceived corruption and then views on elections. Some might say that is not really 5 and 6. That's where is the relationship, and that's why we'll begin to see the thread as we carry on. So I will begin with, don't change it yet. Put it back. I'll begin with, trust in institutions, and there's a reason why we are in a democracy. And of course, certain institutions are necessary for promoting accountability, protecting rights, ensuring that the rule of law is upheld, foster citizen participation, creating that sort of checks and balances as we expect in a democracy. So these institutions that I will share findings on play that critical role in a democracy. And of course, these are institutions that we've been, tracking since 1999, and we do have data spreading across that span. And, we'll begin to see how well, our democratic institutions are doing over time. So let's begin the story. Now, this is not surprising to me because, like I said, we've been tracking this for some time, that the Ghana Armed Forces is the most trusted institution in Ghana today. But let's not get carried away, of course. I mean, it is now, but there are, and, religious bodies. And of course, I'm happy to really shout and say that NGOs and CSOs are also most trusted. But the least trusted, as you can see at the bottom, are assemblymen and women, and metropolitan district chief executives, members of parliament, the ruling government, and it goes all the way up even to the Electoral Commission. And if we go back to what I said earlier about what institutions are supposed to do in a democracy, it gets quite concerning. And this particular finding is a computation of those who said they trust a lot and somewhat. So if you add the two figures, that's quite staggering for all of our institutions. We have only 2 slides under this topic, but these 2 slides, like I said, tell us a certain kind of picture about our institutions. And it will show us in the end what we really need to be focusing on as Ghanaians if we really want our democracy to grow. So I'll now move on to the trends. Now this starts from 2012 and not 1999. Now I'd like you to just focus on the 2 columns on the extreme right where you see blue and red, and then I'll walk you through it one after the other. So in general, trust in these key institutions, including the most trusted, which is the Ghana Armed Forces, has declined significantly over time. Now let's begin. So for members of parliament, if you look at the change from 2022 to 2024, there's been a decline in trust ratings by 3 percentage points. Over time, this is a 12-year period, it's dropped by 25 percentage points. If you go down to opposition parties, we see a marginal drop between 2022, which was when we did the Round 9 survey. But again, see the change over time for 12 years is 27 percentage points. Similarly with the ruling party and then the president, and there's a bit of a bad news when you go down there. I'm not going to mention it, but I'm sure you can see it, that the trust ratings for that particular institution has really declined a whole lot over the 12-year period. Now, I mean, for me, what I find interesting about this trend data is that we see regime change in the dates, which means that, trust ratings, regardless of regime, has been bad. Anyway, so these are the 2 slides that we really wanted to show because there's a lot of story going on with these 2 slides regarding our institutions in Ghana. I'm now going to move on to the vexed issue of corruption. The perception of corruption in Ghana. And again, we'll look at this over time, and then we'll ask ourselves whether we are doing good or we are not. And the trend for this will start from 1999, and we'll get there. Again, I'm not too surprised, at this. Who is in the hierarchy of needs? Who is in the top and who is at the bottom? I'm not too surprised because this was similar to what we found in Round 9. That the police were at the top, and they've held that position for quite a long time. And now, if you had to give awards, I guess we would have given them several by now because they're always on top. But over time, we've been seeing that new entrants have been joining that league of elite corrupt institutions and officials. We see the Office of the Presidency. And, you know, sometimes when we present this data, we get a lot of questions. How would ordinary people, you know what happens in the presidency? After all, they have contact with the police on the roads and that sort of thing. But what about the Office of the Presidency? Now we'll go back to what I shared earlier about what we discuss in the news, right? These sort of perceptions, what we hear, you know, we hear news about all kinds of things. So sometimes we shouldn't be too surprised when we see that Office of the Presidency is up there. The tax officials are also up there amongst the top 3. The members of parliament. Now, I mean, for me, like I said in the beginning about trust in institutions, now, just take a step back. I mean, just take out Office of the President and look at the police, tax officials, and members of parliament. Tax officials oversee revenue collection and generation. Members of parliament are supposed to make laws for us. Judges and magistrates are supposed to judge and ensure that the rule of law is upheld. But citizens view them as corrupt. And so all the way down, you know, the numbers, and again, this is a combination of those who said most or all of them, or some of them. And again, this is staggering. And for a country that has been practicing democracy for this long, NGOs like CDD, there's GRI, there's GACC, we've been preaching the same thing. And it's like, is this work in futility? Kojo Asante. All right, so we'll look at this again over time. And we're starting from 2008 for this. And again, we see that not much has changed between 2022 and 2024, the levels of perceived corruption at the presidency and among now we are looking at only the presidency and MPs for good reasons, has stayed almost the same. But we see significant jumps, and if you just follow the yellow and the orange line, that between 2008 and 2024, a 37% jump of perceived corruption for MPs, and then a 31% jump of perceived corruption at the presidency. And again, you know, I love this trend because, you know, like I said before, it shows you regime change, you know, that nothing happens whether, you know, governments change or whatever. We've had several transitions, but this level of perception of corruption doesn't change. All right, so we again wanted to concentrate on the top 5 of, you know, and then also because, like I mentioned, these institutions are important to us, you know, in a democracy. So we wanted to check and the trend of perceived corruption at that level as well. And again, the story is the same. For tax officials, we see a 19 percentage points, you know, increase in the perception of, you know, perceived corruption at that level. For judges and magistrates, it's 15 percentage points, you know, over time from 2008 to 2024. And then for the police, it's 11 percentage points. So if you follow the lines and then you see the dips up and down, it's really not a good story. So we also want to see the level of corruption, perceived corruption in Ghana. You know, sometimes this will appear in the corruption perception index, and, you know, again, the story is not very different from what I see here. We see really huge dips, you know. We saw a huge dip in 2017. That was our lowest in terms of, you know, how people viewed Ghana, whether it was corrupt or not. So we saw that dip, and then we improved a bit, but it's still not good. And, you know, sometimes, like I said in the beginning, the social demographics of our survey helps us again to drill down a bit more on what, you know, the different demographics are thinking about certain issues. And for this, in this case, we wanted to look at it again to see if there were any differences right? We see the Gen Zs in there, the millennials and the baby boomers, throughout, so whether you're a Gen Z, whether you're a millennial, a baby boomer, Generation X like me, whether you have post-secondary or no education, you're a woman or man, you live in a rural or urban area, your perception of whether corruption has increased in Ghana is somewhere around 7 in 10 Ghanaians. It doesn't matter who you are. I mean, everybody thinks Ghana is a corrupt country. Okay. So, one of the good things, about asking our citizens these questions, and particularly about corruption, is that, it's just like your sibling at home telling on you if you go steal meat from the soup. So we want to find out whether people are really afraid of reporting corruption. Corruption is a bad thing. Are people really afraid? But again, you see that between 2019, and this starts from 2019 and 2024, the number of Ghanaians who say that they can freely report corruption without fear of reprisals has declined by 10 percentage points. That's the blue line. At the same time, those who think they risk retaliation or reprisal has risen by 13 percentage points. Now, when I was going through this data set, I just thought, okay, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, basically. So Ghanaians have, out of fear, resigned themselves not to report corruption. But is it a good thing? Okay. I will now turn to whether our own governments and institutions are doing well at fighting corruption. So look at the evaluation of government performance in fighting corruption. Again, we have a 12-year span, so we have, regime indicators in there. Again, we see a lot of negative ratings of government performance in the fight against corruption. That hasn't really changed. First, between 2022 and 2024, that is, you see that the difference is not much. It's just 3 percentage points of people who think government is doing well in fighting corruption. But over time, that's where the story changes. We see there's been a 26 percentage point increment in the negative evaluations of government performance in the fight against corruption. So in a nutshell, majority of Ghanaians rate the government negatively. Governments, in fact, they're not this government, governments over time, negatively in the fight against corruption. I'm now going to move to elections, and, like as I said in the beginning, sometimes some of these matters you might think are not related to people's perceptions about elections, but they have a relation. And if you pass a fine comb, a fine thread through the dots, you will begin to see why people would, have a certain stance when it comes to elections. So elections are foundational to what we call democracy. That's one way that citizens can participate in the democratic process. And the other day when my boss, Professor Prempe, was giving his lecture, he said Ghanaians really love elections, and I think we do. Elections are also a way in which, citizens can exact what we call vertical accountability, where they can begin to punish non-performing leaders, elected leaders. So elections are important. And I think it's just about checking with somebody. It's about 43 days to the elections. Campaigns, of course, are rife, and people would vote on the 7th of December. So first, let's look at whether there's a support for elections at all in Ghana. And of course, yes, we love elections. So the popular support for elections as a system of choosing leaders has consistently remained high since 2022. And this is from 2022, that's 22-year, time frame. And it's remained high since that time. But we see an 8 percentage point drop. So between that end and the last end, the first 89 and 81, of those who think that elections are, who have the view that elections are the best way to select leaders. As we see that drop, we also see an increase in those who say we should use other means of selecting our leaders. As to what it is, I think it's in the heads of our respondents. So let's hold that too. Let's hold those numbers. And of course, this is what makes elections exciting, different parties. So again, we wanted to see whether there's a support for multi-party competition. And again, since 2022, the majority of Ghanaians have consistently indicated their support for multi-party elections, with a 12 percentage point increase between 2002 and 2024. But we note the percentage drop between 2022 and 2024. Now, this is an election year. So in round 9 in 2020, when we asked, we had 72%. Now, all of a sudden, in an election year, that support has dropped to 69%. Of course, the other players in an election are, other parties, opposition parties. So, one might think this is out of place, but again, it's important because we'll see some changes in there as well. So, again, when it comes to opposition parties or whether they should cooperate with government, we see an increase in the number of Ghanaians who say opposition parties should cooperate with government. I'm smiling because we all know what's been happening recently. And we see a 9 percentage point increase between 2022 and 2024. In 2022 was, 57%, and it's jumped up. But, like I said, we collected this data in August, and none of this had happened then. So this is quite interesting. And we also see a decline in those who say that opposition parties should, hold government accountable. All right, so we now move on to what we call the self-reported voter turnout. This is retrospective. So we asked our respondents whether they voted in they voted in the last election. And we see, and I'm happy that, what we see, the 77% who said they voted in the last election, it's close to what the EC announced as the voter turnout. It's close to it. The EC announced 79% voter turnout. So this self-reporting of whether people voted is quite accurate. The other thing that we usually are interested in is whether the election was free or fair. And again, we see that close to 6 in 10 Ghanaians. Now, if you add up those who said completely free and free but minor problems, you see that it's close to 60% of Ghanaians that are saying that the election was free and fair but with minor problems. And, 15%, which is above 10%, said that it was not free. Now, we also wanted to look at this over time, although, with this, sometimes a bit hippity-hop. But for me, what jumped at me is that, we have data points immediately after elections, and some data points, that just a few years after election. And, the 2017 year, the one, the third row, that, according to our respondents, was the most free, completely free election, because we asked that question in 2017. And it's good to know. We also try to find out whether people are able to participate in elections without fear of intimidation or violence. And again, this goes back to 2020. And thankfully, it's quite a super majority that, says that they exercise their rights as citizens to vote in an election or to participate in campaigns without fear of violence. But it's still concerning that we have 14% who said they feared intimidation or violence. What we want to see is 100%, all of it green. We look at that again in terms of violation of ballot secrecy. Because, you know, you go into the ballot booth, your vote is supposed to be secret, no one is supposed to know about it. And thankfully, again, we see that, you know, close to 8 in 10, actually 8 in 10 Ghanaians said it's not likely that anyone will know who you voted for. But again, the 14%, which is similar to those who said they feared intimidation and violence in elections, are saying that it is likely that powerful people would see who you voted for. I'm smiling because of what is coming, right? There's a hypothetical question we usually ask, and it's important that we ask because an election year, we ask in every round of survey, which is this question: if elections were held tomorrow, and please, I'm not going to say that this number of people said they will vote for any party. For us, 56, and this is coming out of those who say they will vote in the elections, right? So it doesn't include anybody, yeah. So for those who said they'll vote in these elections, we see that 56% said they will vote for a party or an independent candidate. Would not vote. In fact, that's where my story is. Of the 16%, and those who said, you know, they don't know or refuse, you know, that is where my story is. And they would, you know, culminate into something else as we refer to something else as something in Ghana. We will begin to see that pretty soon. So we now picked the lot that said that they wouldn't vote. And we wanted to, you know, just again understand, you know, the numbers. And like I said in the previous slide, this should be our main concern, these two. That's like 48%. And sometimes they call them floating voters. I think those are floating voters who are saying they wouldn't vote. Anyway, we wait and see what happens on election day. We also wanted, because we are beginning to see, and again, one of the slides I showed where I said there was a dip, you know, of, you know, voter, where it dipped to 69%. You see, we are beginning to think this is turning into voter apathy in a way. And we wanted to look at it by age group because, you know, for us, the Gen Zs, the partly millennials, you know, we want to know what young people think about democracy, whether they really are engaged, they want to participate and all of that. And of course, the new voters register said, you know, we had 10% new registrants who are just turned 18. So this is interesting for us that 19% of that age group are saying, is almost 20%, almost getting close to a quarter, are saying that they wouldn't vote. Now, if you look at it, it's coming all the way down. It's only the baby, I think those are baby boomers, the 56-year-olds and above, who, you know, where you see a reduction in that. But otherwise, the youth category, 18 to 25, 26 to 35, you know, are showing apathy towards the election, and that is a problem. We looked at it again across the demographics, and, you know, women jump out as, you know, the gender that says they wouldn't vote. Urbanites, people who live in the urban area, like all of us sitting here, people with higher education, post-secondary and secondary, and then those with low-lived poverty and moderate-lived poverty so the moderate-lived poverty, these two are who you call your middle classes. In the next presentation, I think we would explain more what we mean by lived poverty and moderate poverty. I don't want to take us into that in this presentation, but that is our middle class, basically. All right. So we, in 2020 and in 2026, we initiated what we call our pre-election surveys. And, you know, those surveys are slightly different from the Afrobarometer surveys. We focus more on election-related issues, and we ask certain questions. We asked a similar question in this particular round of survey. It was a country-specific question. And we wanted to know what will influence voter choices. Of course, in our pre-election surveys, we wanted to test if Ghanaians were beginning to make their choices based on issues rather than personalities and ethnicity and religion. The way we asked the question in this round, in this Afrobarometer survey, is slightly different, but again, it tells us something. So we asked what will influence people's votes. And honesty, the candidate's character, and campaign promises are the top three deciders for our voters. You know, a candidate's religious faith, a candidate's ethnicity, and money and gifts, you know, don't seem to really measure up. But we know there's a lot of vote buying in Ghana, and it's one of those issues that I know people censor. You know, we asked them in our pre-election surveys, we've asked whether you received a gift to vote for a particular candidate. It's always easy to point the fingers at the neighbors. So we saw higher numbers of Ghanaians saying that their neighbors and people in their community received, you know, gifts, but they themselves didn't receive. So there's a bit of censorship when it comes to that. It's just like when you ask somebody whether they paid a bribe for something, they'll point at somebody else but themselves. So, I mean, this is but we've been cracking our brains as to what honesty really means in the minds of Ghanaians and what character actually means. So, well, there you have it. I will conclude with one more slide on the findings on elections. Again, it's something that, you know, you hear people talk about. We've known about it for a while in our elections, when people are voting. We want to know whether people will truly, you know, vote skirt and blouse, what they call skirt and blouse. So again, you see that people really prefer the same, like what I'm wearing, black on black, no difference. That they'll vote for a presidential candidate from the same party and a parliamentary candidate. That's 50, and that corresponds to a certain number we saw earlier on, if you remember. And, you know, 50% said we'll vote for skirt and blouse. So that is still on our books. Skirt and blouse will happen. And then so on and so forth. So these are findings on elections. And I hope that just like me, all of you have seen the thread that we wove from trust in institutions all the way through corruption to this point, because there's something definitely running through. So I will just now summarize some of the key findings again, just to remind those of us who just joined what you missed. So among the key findings, public institutions such as the Ghana Armed Forces, religious bodies, traditional leaders, and non-governmental organizations are the most trusted. Trust in key state institutions have witnessed a decline compared to 2022, but major declines since 2012. Among the key public institutions, the presidency, tax officials, MPs, judges, and magistrates are most widely perceived as most corrupt. Almost 7 in 10 Ghanaians say the level of corruption in the country has increased somewhat or a lot. And we see that there's a 3 percentage point increase from 2022 to 2024. And it's just about a quarter of Ghanaians that believe that people can report corruption without fear of retaliation. And then when it comes to elections, people prefer elections to any other form of choosing leaders. 6 in 10 Ghanaians say that the general elections of 2022 was largely free and fair, and that candidates' honesty, their character, campaign promises as some of the reasons why they'll vote for a particular candidate. So this is where I bring my story to an end. Thank you very much.
Dr. Salome, not a consultant, but the Director of Research here at CDD-Ghana. So if you are just joining us, please, we are live on Facebook and YouTube. You can find us at CDD-Ghana, and then on X or Twitter, you find CDD-G, capital GHA. And the hashtags again, hashtag Ghana Elections 2024, hashtag corruption, hashtag Voices Africa. Thank you very much once again for the findings. I think they are scientific data on how citizens are faring down there. And it's important that we present some of these findings this way to inform policy. But we also want to have a panel discussion with some distinguished personalities so we are able to bring home some of these findings. As Doug was presenting, you might be seeing some of the data and then you'll be wondering, as she had said, is it really true? But as you saw from the pictures and also the data, it's important we have another session where we are able to really bring home some of these scientific data into how we experience them as individuals here, especially if you are not part of the data collection, not as a person who is collecting the data, but if we didn't come to you. But we want to have a discussion, bringing this into perspective and also making sure that we understand and see how we are able to build the trust that we want to see, especially since we have accepted democracy as a system that we want to run with. So the first panel, we want to invite Mrs. Mary Awela Adair. She is the Executive Director of Ghana Integrity Initiative, the GII, and also the Ghana chapter. And then Madam has been part of the GII since 2009 and has risen through the ranks. Madam, please kindly take a seat. The next panelist is Honorable Edem Senanu. He is a management and development consultant with 30 years working experience in providing services at the national and international levels. He is currently the lead consultant for Alpha Primos Limited. He is an executive director to the African 2000 Network Ghana and a technical director for Cocolab Company Limited. Among other things, let's welcome Honorable Edem Senenu. Last but not the least, we have Dr. John Osei Kwapon, who is a governance and democracy expert. He is a democracy and development fellow with the CDD-Ghana and also a risk assessment in West Africa. Doug, please kindly take a seat. So thank you very much for joining us. As I had said, we just want to have a conversation around the findings that we've had. So first of all, we would like to have your take. I mean, in a snapshot, what's your take on the findings that Doctor has shared with us?
Thank you very much. For me, the one key finding that strikes me is the question about the opposition should cooperate with the government. You do notice that there's a 9 percentage point increase between 2022 and 2024. My take on that is it is a reflection of concerns among Ghanaians about what I see as increasing partisanship and deepening polarization. And so we've seen what has happened, particularly with how the 8th Parliament turned out and some of the skirmishes we've seen between the opposition and the ruling party. The quick thing I want to add, though, is that I hope it is also not construed as Ghanaians don't want accountable governance. That when you ask them, do you prefer accountable governance or you want cooperation from the opposition, they are picking cooperation over accountable governance. And for that, I want to draw your mind to one of the questions that Afrobarometer does ask regularly, which is Parliament should monitor the president. And between when the question was first asked in round 4 and round 9, you actually see a 16 percentage point increase in that demand for parliamentary oversight over the presidency, which for me is a form of accountability. So when we are interpreting this increased demand for cooperation, you want to put it within the context that Ghanaians still want accountable governance, and you see that reflected in other Afrobarometer questions.
Thank you very much. So thank you. I was going to say same. I mentioned it to Edeb that increasingly some of the observations we have made working on the subject matter of anti-corruption is the fact that when you work with the public institutions, you are able to gain support and do a lot more than when you work alone. And there is always resistance to that effect. And so for us, it's a reflection of what the citizens believe we should be doing going forward. However, that does not suggest that citizens believe that the opposition parties working with the ruling government would in any way compromise their stance and their ideological or philosophical stance in any way. Because these are governments in waiting as well. And so as governments in waiting, they would also have to espouse their ideologies very strongly to show that they are in waiting. However, the other thing I saw as, I don't know whether it also confirms already existing ideas, is the fact that increasingly citizens believe that the presidency is one of the most corrupt institutions in Ghana. It's going up and up as you look at the reflections, and other studies also show same. It's not just the Afrobarometer. I can reference the Global Corruption Barometer. If you look at other indices as well, it's shown same, that Ghanaians believe and perceive that at the level of the presidency, there's more corruption. And it's not just perception. They know that when it comes to budget allocation and also disbursement, some of the things that happen, allocations are done, office of the president. And so this is a huge allocation that is done, disbursed, and sometimes without accountability. And so people who either work in these spaces or outside them and experience them in a way, then tend to believe that there is a lot of things going on there. People go to funerals, they are making huge funeral donations when it comes to our welfare-ish sort of society that we live in. We have a lot of hirelings within this sector as well, who are not paid through the consolidated fund, but are paid on tables. And this doesn't portend for the accountability and transparency we want. And so it's not surprising at all if citizens believe that the office of the president, after the police, which admittedly is taking the lead without any effort at all because of their continuous visibility. We have had this discussion over time, and you realize that their continuous visibility on the roads, because we engage with them, we have issues, we have to go to the charge offices and the rest. It makes us see them, and so that's moves from beyond perception to reality. We sit in the trotros on a daily basis and we see the drivers give small monies to the police standing on the road. And as we were told before by one of the big men, women in the police, they do not ask. We also freely and willingly give. And so, and another chief says the police is not corrupt. It is we, the citizens, who pay homage to them. And so some of these unacceptable behaviors undoubtedly make the police a special breed when it comes to bribery, particularly when you're talking about corruption. So it's not surprising at all. Another thing I picked is the issue of retaliation going up. Even though people believe that they can report corruption, increasingly it's again confirmed studies that have been conducted over the past decade that citizens believe that if they report corruption, there is fear of retaliation, fear of reprisals. Either they will be vilified. Instead of being victors, they become the villains for reporting acts of corruption. I believe that stands out and confirms other studies as well. And let me just give an example of somebody who comes to the office to say they are coming to report corruption and the person wants to speak to me. I allow the person to come in and he has a problem with one of the institutions because they have reported corruption and out of it he has rather been interdicted. And he's reported this admin injustice issue to an organization, and these guys are also not doing anything about his complaint. And in his frustration, he wants GII to get him a lawyer to pursue his case. So these are some of the issues that show that reporting corruption is not an easy task. And as we go on, I'll say more. Thank you.
Thank you. So, looking at the data, I mean, I have categorized the figures I could see. For the democratic institutions and representatives, you find that Ghanaians have lower levels of confidence in our traditional good governance institutions and representatives. On the other hand, the data shows that we have higher levels of confidence in the military, religious reps, and civil society. Taking at a broad level, it suggests that we are not experiencing the democratic dividends. And citizens are saying that this arrangement is good to the extent that it provides us the peace for us to go about our daily work. But it is not solving the issues. When we want issues solved, we will go and talk to some religious person or engage our civil society or other networks that we believe in. I think there's a danger there. The danger is that when you have a crisis, all of a sudden people want to throw away the democratic arrangement. And the data is, I mean, the gap between the confidence level or trust, if you see the president at 14%, the courts at 13%, electoral commission at 11%, it's so low. I mean, if you're doing a standard test and somebody got below 50%, it's bad enough. But all these institutions are having below 15%. That is telling us a story. It is further complicated when you look at the data that says that there's been a decline in trust, but not just that, a rapid decline in some institutions. And so we are seeing the president at minus 29%, electoral commission at minus 30%, ruling party. I mean, the figures are really substantive. And so I think that we have a crisis. We may seem to be in a lull where everything seems to be working. But if there's people paying attention to the detail of the statistics, it's like a disaster just waiting to happen. And we better need to ask ourselves, what do we do to change the situation before something else happens? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Edem. I think when Dr. Salome was presenting, one of the key things that I got from her presentation was the fact that it doesn't really seem easily available the interaction or the relevance of the three thematic areas. So we are looking at trust, corruption, and elections. And then she had mentioned that these institutions are fundamental to democracy. So if the citizens do not really trust these institutions, I think, as Honorable has said, there is a need for us to go back and look at these fundamentals and see how we look at it, whether democracy is really solving the issues that we want to solve as a nation. Thank you very much. So back to Mrs. Ade. How do you, Ada, Mrs. Ada, thank you very much. How do you interpret the persistent perception of corruption among the institutions based on your work experience and also what you do as an individual?
All right, so is it perception? I think we have moved beyond that, that discussion. Yeah, but looking at it over the years and also with what we have done collectively in civil society and as a state, one of the evidence we have gathered is the fact that the trust in the institution is the factor of the transparency and accountability benchmarks that we are talking about. We see our institutions increasingly turning into huge bureaucratic machines that are fulfilling the whims and caprices of political ideology. So the excessive politicization of the institution or the public state institutions we are talking about have seen increasingly what we are talking about today as increased lack of accountability, increase, lack of transparency. We see political actors gaining from these. People come in, and if you are not, if the big man in there is not kowtowing to what they want to see done, then it becomes a challenge. And because of that, we see that people are doing a lot of wrong things and getting away with it. So public trust is as a result of or the lack of it in our institution is as a result of the huge corruption, and it's not just perceptions. Again, we say the barriers to some of the anti-corruption efforts that we have put in place. Let me step back a little and talk about some of the efforts we have put in place over time. One of the recent is the NACAP, the National Anti-Corruption Action Plan, a very fine document which was put in place for 10 years to implement various novel strategies, from public accountability, public financial management, to, in fact, renewing our mindsets through a cultural reorientation program, which I believe is still a very important one if we are doing an ACAP 2, or for us as a state to look at, because there are a lot of things that happen there. But because we didn't give much attention to it, accountability mechanisms within this were so very low. We had all the setup to implement. Unfortunately, there was nothing happening within this space. We had 10 good years to implement NACAP. In fact, this year is our evaluation year. We are waiting for the evaluation to step into NACAP 2. I don't know what is going to happen there. We haven't sufficiently addressed the subject matter of corruption. And so, for that matter, citizens do not see much. Then again, we talk about the public's exposure to issues of corruption. Day in, day out, since, let me take it back to when Dr. Salome talked about the data. Since 2002, you would realize that our fight against corruption, since the Kufuor era, let's say the 30-year adventure we are undertaking, which is precariously becoming a difficult one, you would realize that we started with probity and accountability, and we had some very fine measures in place. Howbeit, we had dictatorial measures in place then. But today, if you reflect back, some of the issues that were addressed then, today we don't have them. So citizens see that when we had even soldiers in place, So there was some level of probity and accountability when it comes to sanctioning of the corrupt, when it comes to dealing with issues of corruption. Take the asset declaration regime. Then it was publicized and gazetted. We came to a democracy. We decided that we wanted a law. We made Act 550. And Act 550 says that, oh, you declare your assets, go and dump it with the Auditor General. When there is a need, we can go for it. When citizens see the mass lack of compliance in our systems, and yet we say that on a daily basis, there is one corruption issue after the other, and nothing is done about it. What do you expect? That has moved from perception into a reality issue. So let's begin to say that in Ghana, the issues about perceptions are more reality than the perceiving. Citizens see, they live. And so we say that those who have witnessed and have been victims of corruption should make their issues known. Today, we have heard that people are not even ready to do so because they have seen that there is a lack of compliance. We have laws, we have all the beautiful institutions. We set up the OSP. The story is there for me and you to then verify if the purpose for which we have set it up since 2017, 19 has been fulfilled since this dispensation. So please, it's not about perception anymore. The issue is that we have seen corruption on a daily basis. People have been alleged to have been corrupt. We see the court system not adjudicating as we should see it on a daily basis. We want expeditious prosecution. We want expeditious investigations. It's not happened. And yet, we see the Auditor General also citing people for corruption. The audit committees in the various entities are not doing as much as we would want because we see recurrence of same on a daily basis. So for me, it's moved beyond that. And so let's talk about how we can get the states to be more proactive in ensuring sanctioning of the corrupt, and then we can deal with this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Ada. You had really touched on some of the things, and you are saying that it's not a perception, it's a reality. And then also, you had touched on these things in relation to the impact of these realities on our governance system. So I will come to you, Honorable Edem, in relation to what Mrs. Ada has just said. What do you think are some of the noticeable factors behind these observations or these realities? And do you think we should be worried? Are they significant? Do you think we should be worried and then we should do anything about that?
Well, yes. I think that when Adam was presenting, she pointed out how the context matters. So what's been going on in the media will influence how people view things. And if in the period where this assessment was being done, we had, I'm sure the Snit Hotels thing was burning at the time. And you remember, it took us all the way to Labour, saying that we are going to shut down Ghana. I mean, something that was major. We've had the Cecilia Dapa. And so the context would definitely give people a certain impression that things are not going well. But beyond that would be the personal experiences. And in the context of poverty and the economic situation, if you have to start giving money out, and I think a recent data, I think it was a Traj UNODC report, where about 27% of adults in Ghana in 1 year said they had paid bribes. And for some of them, they said they had paid bribes as many as 5 times. So the frequency was about 5 times. I mean, it just tells you that the personal experiences are real. And so it's not a perception. And in their minds, it's not helping us because we have families to feed. That definitely is a concern. So we ought to be working to address the economic situation. That's one. But beyond that, we ought to be making sure that the people who represent public sector are persons of integrity. We need to have systems that are able to fish out or flash out in a very robust way people who don't want to take the fact that they have a public responsibility not to take advantage of others or to exploit them out of the system. So I think these are important issues. I think that we just have not worked hard enough to enforce existing rules, and we probably need to have better rules, for example, by passing the COPO, which will help us have a stronger legal framework to identify people who are, flouting the rules, who are taking advantage of citizens, and to penalize them, sanction them, set precedents that will make it high risk for you to want to continue doing this. So yes, I think that there are issues in terms of experience, there are issues in terms of the poverty situation. I think that if the institutions were able to have a stronger laws that could deal incisively with those who are being found to be corrupt, I think we'll make better progress.
Factors are really realities, not perceptions, as we've said. And then most alarming is the fact that as we are stressing, we are saying that democracy is a way of life. We are saying that we are in a democratic dispensation. So how do we ensure that we really uphold the values of democracy as Ghanaians? And how do we accept and even accommodate how democracy is evolving, looking at the issues of economics, looking at the issues of how each individual experiences this democracy in a different way? Doc?
So I often say that Ghanaians have made their peace with democracy. And whenever I say that, there are some who will then point out some of the pinch points that they are facing in their everyday lives, and then ask, how then can you make that argument that Ghanaians have made their peace with democracy? Or even when you look at some of the data from Afrobarometer and the low trust in institutions, the increasing perception of corruption, how do you reconcile that with the statement that Ghanaians have made their peace with democracy? But I continue to say that because we have the right set of normative values and attitudes about different things that constitute the democratic architecture. So, for example, you saw in the presentation that we support the use of elections as the method for selecting our leaders. There are other kinds of questions that are normative in nature in which our dispositions are very positive. We continue to say that democracy is preferable to any other form of government. We believe in parliamentary oversight of the executive. We believe in judicial constraint on the executive. So there are these questions that if you look at 9 rounds of Afrobarometer, you do at least get to the point where you can say, yes, we've made our peace with democracy. What we haven't made our peace with is how it is working. So if you look at the Afrobarometer question on satisfaction with democracy, it phrases it not as the extent of your satisfaction or otherwise with democracy per se, but the way it is working. And that is, for me, our next, if, we've done 30 years already, the next 30 years, that is some of our immediate task, right? That how do we take all these positive dispositions that we hold and the embrace of the normative values of democracy and translate it into actual things that make citizens feel like the democracy is working? Because the danger with democracy not working in the everyday lives of citizens is that, when they cannot get clean water, good schools, when the economy is not going well, the first thing they look at is the political dispensation under which they live. And they tie it back and say, well, this democracy is not delivering. And that, for me, is where we really have to start putting in a lot of effort, even as we try to consolidate our democracy. The last thing I would add is, so yes, even those who say they are dissatisfied with the way democracy is working, if you disaggregate the AB data, they still say that democracy is preferable to any other form of government. So that is the peace part of it. Our task now is, how do you translate that into addressing issues of corruption, addressing the everyday bread and butter issues. And that for me is, if we can solve those everyday public problems and challenges, the embrace of democracy would even be deeper and stronger, more than even at the levels that we are seeing already, which is high enough.
Thank you very much, Doc. I'll come to you again, Mrs. Ada. You had hinted on the reason why citizens are not even interested in even reporting some of these issues. You had given us an instance. But I think it's important we also highlight how interventions like the Afrobarometer can be able to inspire or even encourage citizens to just move beyond the mistrust and see how we move beyond the issues that we are having. So maybe you could share a light on how such institutions like the CDD, the GII, other CSOs can really help citizens to build the trust that we can use to demand better accountability.
Thank you. So one of the things I believe we, perhaps in civil society, has not done a lot of is building coalitions and networks to support whistleblowers across Ghana. And I say so because we have various mechanisms in place. In GII, we have what we call the Advocacy and Legal Advice Center that is set up for victims and witnesses of corruption to make their grievances known, and there is assurance of free legal advice and also assurance of referral and follow-ups. I know other institutions also have these. However, we have a gap that needs to be rectified, and our advocacy has been in that regard, that the Whistleblower Act as it stands does not give civil society the mandate to be one of those that complaints are addressed to. And so you realize that I say we do it, and we work with some state institutions to be able to then say that we have this issue, we refer it to them, and they handle it for us. So if that gap is not rectified, then it becomes a very difficult challenge for us to navigate, because you are helping the person, but you have to still go through somebody to be able to make any impact. But that does not make us relentless, so that's why we are doing that. But how do we do it together? Whistleblowing is not an easy task for anybody, and it's difficult to get people to want to even complain. The other issue is with confidentiality. People are not sure, and one of the reasons they say, if I say it the next day, another person knows about it, and I get into trouble. So we are supposed to also be working towards building confidential mechanisms that citizens can trust. How will they trust us? They will only trust us when they experience our services and also know that we are standing firmly behind some of those who make these complaints. And so when people have the courage to make such complaints, we should also be sharing some of the good practices out there. So for us, we do a good practice manual, but how many people know about it? Today, if I ask if you know about ELAC, I'm very sure many of the people in this room would say no, apart from Ima and maybe Kojo. I am very sure many people do not know about it. So we need to also then sell our stories that we have these platforms, we have these mechanisms in place, and so citizens should not be afraid at all. But also to show that, yes, people have come, like for instance, this is not wholly corruption, but somebody who complains to us, he sees institutions that are taking advantage of the state, not paying their taxes and getting away with it. And because there is the mechanism in place for compensation, then I come to the issue of compensating people, giving incentives for reporting. The Whistleblower Act as it stands is supposed to have a compensation mechanism. That fund has not been set up. But what can civil society as a whole do to ensure that what we are also doing leads to some sort of incentive, positive reinforcement for people who would want to engage in corruption reporting or reporting of wrong behavior? This gentleman I talk of, when he sees something wrong, he goes to report. And then the GRA, which has a mechanism in place for their informants, then calculate and give him. And these are large sums, huge sums of money he is making. So we need to find a way to build networks to have some small compensation in place so that when Dr. Kwapong sees something and he reports and it leads to the retrieval of something, then we can give him something to serve as an incentive for others to want to do same. Then civil society also has a role to then work together, and we have done it before. When it came to the removal of the former Auditor General, we stood together and we went to the Supreme Court. Why are we not also telling citizens that these opportunities exist for them? So when you have a case, please come to us. We will stand again together. We will find lawyers and we will walk that road with you. We will stand by you till the end. If we make some of these available, I believe that we will be making a significant inroad in when it comes to the issues around whistleblowing. Mind you, many institutions are not interested in this because it will lead to a lot of reprisals for them. And so we need to stand firm, we need to be persistent, we need to encourage, and we need to lead. If we say others should do and we are not doing it, we would not be gaining much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we come to you for some of the critical reforms, I think we would like to go to the audience to get any question, or if anybody has any contribution to the conversations that we are having.
Hello. My name is Sextus Dong Ulo. I'm a journalist, I'm a producer, and a friend of civil society. Listening to you, Adam, I was agreeing with you until Doc came in and said Ghanaians are making peace with democracy. And that really worries me, because all the data that we have received, if we look at it holistically, and the growing confidence, trusts that people have in the military, and the decreasing confidence in the presidency particularly, and the increasing perception of corruption at the presidency particularly. And you also often would hear people say that this wouldn't have happened if the military were in charge. In very recent years, this is become very common. And we hear people talk about how the police probably did not handle one situation or the other properly. And they thought that the military would have done a good job. And a lot of people think that, I mean, if we had the military at the helm of affairs, for instance, we wouldn't see the levels of corruption that we are seeing in the public sector generally, and at the presidency particularly, the abuse and misuse of public office and public resources. So I keep asking myself, and again, the growing popularity of our neighbor's president, the Burkinabe president, at a time that the international community is probably up in arms against military rule in Burkina Faso, we often would hear public commentary within our own space of how the military ruler over there is doing something new for the people. Yes, I know about the report that you referenced, where people say even though democracy, we are not getting the benefits of democracy as we would expect, we still would choose that form of governance, and we prefer that form of governance to any other form of governance. But some way, deep down, are we not worried about the growing confidence that people repose in the military. I mean, we can count the ills of the military where they have received public condemnation, and one of them would be the invasion of Ashaman, as some of us call it. And as for whatever happened in Parliament, a lot of us don't really blame the military. We blame the politicians for enabling it. But are we not getting scared that in our conversations generally, we see people begin to say that the military would have handled this situation better or could have done better in one situation or the other? And is there a way that data such as this can inform a certain reorientation and point to, or probably just make people realize that there's a way we can cement the democracy that we have, notwithstanding that we are not getting or reaping the full benefits of it, it still must remain the preferred choice. What can we use this data to do, bottom line? Auntie Mary, for the first time, I either haven't been paying attention or this just jumped at me in a very weird way. I'm seeing the media captured in the corruption list. What have we done? and in this particular one, I see the segregation between private practitioners and public media practitioners. Okay, what have we done?
Thank you very much. Before we move to answer, maybe another.
Okay, so my name is Kojo Asante with CDD. I just to follow Sistus. I think for me the question is, given that we are going into an election, and one question is whether or not the political class. I mean, you look at all the data, and there are really serious problems that have to be tackled, and when you listen to the campaigns and the slogans, and for the first time, actually, I have not heard as much negative advertising like I'm hearing now on radio every single day. And I don't know, those who study it, probably, this has been going on, but this is the first time that I'm hearing a lot of it on mainstream radio, like direct negative, targeting your opponent and saying, the opponent is bad and don't vote for him and, all of that. This is very sort of American style negative advertising on all the time on radio, constantly, which probably signal also where we've gone in terms of our democracy. But in the discourse, in the political engagements, in what our political class is talking about, there's none of this on the table in terms of the danger. I mean, in the manifesto, when you read it, there is some recognition of this idea that, there are some foundational issues we have to return, but it's not in the conversation. So I'm asking myself, is it too late for us to talk about it? Because I think what Sistus is saying is that there has to be a response. The response cannot be just one side of the equation, which is society talking about it. The political class that are right in the middle of it, that continue to show these symptoms, like what happened, in Parliament, as if completely oblivious to this behavior. If they don't begin to reflect something different, then there's real danger for all of us. Because the Afrobarometer has shown very clearly in its recent flagship report that covers 2011 to 2023 that one of the main drivers of dissatisfaction is bad elections, corruption, and equality before the law. Of course, there are other things like economy and other factors that are also shown to be statistically significant. But if you look at some of the countries that have deteriorated, the tipping point is to have these things consistently play out over time. And now at some point, it just begin to unravel. So when you start seeing deterioration over a period for that long, 10%, 20%, of very low trust ratings, and as you say, you've had changes in government, it doesn't really mean anything. It's still showing a certain level of deterioration. That is a worry. And the CPI, the Corruption Perception Index, is also shown that when you begin to show stagnation in corruption for three consecutive times, you begin to show a downward trend, and we've already done 3. So if it keeps going that way, you know which direction you are going. So we don't have 30 years, that's for sure. It does show that whatever action that has to be taken and whatever recognition from the entire polity has to happen now. And if there was ever a time, it needs to start figuring in this conversation around elections already. And I'm hoping that if there's any takeaway from our conversation here, and as the Afrobarometer comes and we are discussing it, it should ignite a serious conversation about what is not being talked about in this election.
Please, you will take the next 2 rounds, and then we will get the responses from the panel.
Okay, so my name is Osman. I'm an NGIJ fellow at the Media Foundation for West Africa. Trust in institutions and corruption. You will find the Electoral Commission in these 2 thematic areas. But Ghanaians still believe that we have free and fair elections every year. I'm trying to look at the correlation between these 2. You don't trust the EC, you perceive the EC to be corrupt, but still, the outcome of the elections, you feel it is free and fair. I'm trying to look at, in the future, are we going to get to a point where people will say, look, we don't trust the EC, there's perceived corruption in there, then we will not accept the election results and it will bring chaos. Are we going to, yes, are we going to get to a point like that? Thank you.
Please tell us.
Thank you very much. I'm called Magdalene Kanai. I'm with the Peace Council. I just want to add to what has already been said about corruption particularly, and that it is not just a perception, but it is a reality. And putting the Ghana police at the very top, and they have always been there for many years now, and I think that they are guarding, their position very jealously, and not wanting to give it up is true. For instance, last Saturday, I was going to a funeral. I didn't know where the place was, so I was using my GPS, and I was driving. And the GPS kept directing me, go straight, and I didn't know the road. So I saw green light, and I passed. And the police were standing opposite there. They stopped me because I certainly passed a wrong road. That I think that it was a one-way. So I stopped them, and they talked to me, and I explained to them I was using my GPS, and that is what the instruction told me. And they explained, and I said, yes, I know that I am wrong, and I accept it. Then the officer spoke to me, madam, you are going to a funeral, and you have done this. And then a female officer came around. And when she got to me, the officer walked away and said, okay, that is your mom, talk to her. She would, you know. So I stood there and I said, well, I'm going for a funeral. So what is next? What do we do? Oh, Mama, okay, you can just do, you know, and usually it doesn't come out very straight. And I stood there, and she kept standing, and I said, what do we do next? So she said, oh, okay, you are going for a funeral. I said, yes. So she said, okay, I will be here, so you go and come. So I left. You see, I am saying this, for instance, I certainly did something wrong. And why are the institutions not working? For instance, if there was a formal, you know, way of, let's say at that very point, there was a way to pay something for the wrong that you have done, I would have paid and gone. Why are the institutions not putting in place measures to be more effective so that, you know, we can all benefit? The police are suffering. They don't have a means of transport. They don't have, you know, logistics. They don't have that. And there are so many opportunities to be able to have this. Why are the institutions not working? We have so many laws. And you will agree with me that in Ghana, we know how to write laws, Papa. We write the laws very, very well, but how effective have they been implemented? I think that is one of our biggest problems. So, and you see that we talk about the institutions and how we have politicized the institutions. That is why it is not working well. We put round pegs into what? Square holes, so it doesn't fit, just because this person belongs to that party. I think that, you know, we need to begin to look at our consciences as a people and try to move this country a little, you know, more positively. Thank you.
Thank you too very much. Please, you will come back with the other round. So we just want to answer the first round of questions. Please, just be reminded that we are live on Facebook and YouTube. And please, the hashtags election, Ghana election 2024, Voices of Africa, and hashtag corruption. Please, if you have any other comments as you join, you can also leave it online, and then we'll come back to it. Doug and Mary can answer it.
So I do understand the question you raise about this idea that, on the one hand, I would make the argument that we've made our peace with democracy, and yet when you look at all of these other things, you're starting to see citizens losing confidence, particularly in your institutions that make democracy work. And therefore, how then do you use such data and information to structure the conversation, particularly in an election year? So one of the things that in the beginning of the year, an initiative that I started called the Democracy Project, which was funded by the West Africa Democracy Solidarity Network, WADEMOS. We had an activity called the Democracy Pledge. We actually reached out to representatives of the political parties. We had a meeting here with them. And we shared with them 6 key challenges from not just primarily Afrobarometer, but some of the governance indices that we look at regularly. And the whole idea was to say to them, look, whilst there are hopeful signals about Ghana's democracy, there are some deeply worrying signs. And given that this is an election year, is a good opportunity to take some of those challenges and make it a central part of the election. And we even further said, look, we would want to see in your manifestos a democracy pledge that says, okay, the data is pointing to lack of trust in institutions and increasing perceptions of corruption. As a party, these are the specific things that we will do to try and turn it around. None of the political parties included that idea of a democracy pledge. Yes, there are some ideas about some governance things, Article 71, things like that. But there are deepening challenges to the democracy architecture. So the hopeful signal is that the normative values that I talk about is the anchor on which we can address some of these pinch points. But I was hoping that in this election year, what you do about the future of Ghana's democracy and how you address some of the deepening concerns that is emerging. And the thing is, it's not only showing up in Afrobarometer. If you look at varieties of democracy, after a period of almost 10 years of us being classified as a liberal democracy, now we've moved back into a territory called electoral democracy, right? So essentially, the elections part of our democracy is working, right, as per these governance indices. But it's the other everyday public administration governance questions that we're struggling. So I can see why in your mind it would feel so odd that you look at all of these red flags and still say that we prefer democracy to any other form of government. But the evidence does show that if you ask all of the democracy-related questions, we embrace them at very high levels. But there's a tension right there, and I'm just hoping that because they are hopeful signals, we would also not look at it and say, then everything is fine, which is what I feel is the main reason why the democracy pledge activity did not gain enough traction, because we recognize a few problems here and there, but the architecture overall is fine. But it's not. There are some real challenges that I was hoping would be a central part of this year's election. And hopefully, sooner rather than later, we would have these real conversations about how we address the worrying signs, whilst at the same time embracing the hopeful signals that we see.
Sad reality. When Kojo was speaking, I was reflecting on if we actually think data is relevant, not as our politicians, do they think about all the issues around democracy and the data that is generated? Because in the academic space, there's so much data. Civil society is collaborating also, and then also churning out a lot of data. So these surveys are for a purpose. However, as has been indicated, we do a lot of work around this, generate information, and yet our political actors are not interested in incorporating this data into the policies and the frameworks they want to operationalize when they are given the mandate to work. I give a case in point. We had opportunity to discuss the CPI in detail. I believe Prof was the one who did the harness for us, telling government of how the CPI is calculated, how it's a composite index, and the various sources through which it is done, and some of the indicators for getting some low-hanging fruits as well. Unfortunately, that was in 2017, if I'm correct. Unfortunately, nothing has come to that discussion. And so this is an area where civil society is trying its best to generate the data, generate evidence, engage political actors or their political parties, and also the institutions. However, sometimes they know that this data is credible, but they find it difficult picking it because of maybe political interest. I believe so. It's not that they do not know that these would inure to strengthening policy and making implementation processes even more robust. They know. It's not that they don't know. If they don't know, we have had opportunities to engage as well. And so nobody would say they don't know. When it comes to the issue of the correlation between the trust in the institution and then, or the mistrust, because over the years we have a 30% drop in the trust for our electoral management body. And yet Ghanaians believe that they trust the credibility of our elections. That's food for thought. But I also believe it's a symptom of the various mechanisms we put in place during elections to ensure that there is transparency. And so Ghanaians can say for a fact that because Kodeo was out there on the field, because other observer missions were out there, they can, for a fact, give credence to the results that is churned out. So I'm not surprised at all that they are saying this. But then it's food for thought for all of us that the electoral management body itself has credibility issues because Ghanaians think they cannot trust because of some of the issues that have arisen over time. We have gone from 1992, where we didn't talk much about them, through to the 2000s, when we didn't talk much about them until Ghanaians became very interested in recent times. And I'm not talking about just this one, but other, I believe issues started with the Charlotte Mensah regimes till now. Charlotte said, sorry, till now. So what is different? Why is there the difference? It's food for thought for all of us. And Sixtus talks about why are we saying the media is corrupt. The media indicator has been in the Afrobarometer over time. It's been there always. It's always been there. And we ask, there are a lot more institutions that are captured. It's not just these few ones. Some do not come up. The good thing is that when we are cited, we should take it in good faith and try to identify what we are doing that is making the people of Ghana believe that there is corruption. And sisters, I believe that if we are going to talk about some of these issues, we will not close today. We have seen a lot of politicization of the media front. We have seen a lot of solé. We have seen a lot of story planting. And we have seen a lot of skewed reporting. Sometimes agenda setting to ensure that some of our stories do not gain traction. Sometimes you see a very good corruption story, and the next day all the media decide that this story is not going to sell. I'm not saying you took anything, but just like we have said, the perceptions out there are that something is happening in the governance of the media that is making it very much a potent ground for corruption to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. I think let me start with the Electoral Commission one. And I was going to ask Dr. Salome what the timing of the data collection is like. Because if it's being done before elections, the posture of the EC would feed into the report. And I think that's what we are seeing. That generally our EC has not seen as accommodating of feedback, and it reflects. Whereas you are doing a post one on the outcome when you were reporting that the 2021. So I'm not surprised at that seeming contradiction or paradox because of the timing. So that's with that. Now, There are, I think, 6 areas I want to talk about. Constitutional reform. If we are talking about key reforms, constitutional. The excessive powers of the executive is reflecting in what happens when political parties take over. I think the political party architecture itself has a problem. We need to put a microscope on it. Because the parties themselves, they allow the president maybe 2 years. After that, the rest of the party take over and decide what should be done. And then the agenda that was set in terms of the manifesto is thrown out of the window. So we need to put a microscope on the political parties. We definitely need constitutional reform to cut down the excessive executive power. The idea that they can appoint anyone from parliament, which then reduces the effectiveness of oversight of parliament over the executive. Because some people always engineer getting a position as a minister, and after they got that position, they are no longer going to pay, strict attention to what the government is saying, which may not be right or inure to the benefit of people. So constitutional reform is critical. Then legal reforms. We've talked about assets declaration, which is not fit for purpose. We've talked about witness protection, which needs to be improved. Whistleblower also needs to be improved. We probably need a political party financing, regime, because, they spend so much money in billions that when they come in, it's now time to try and figure out how do we pay back and then take care of ourselves. So if we don't put any, delineations on what happens, that's a problem. We need to pass the COPO. The COPO, I think there's been a lot of thought in it because it allows for the verification of assets, for sanctions. It talks about code of conduct that insists on who is a professional public officer and the education so that citizens know what to expect and they can complain. There are administrative arrangements for complaining, for investigation, for sanctions. That's very important. So let's pass the COPO. Then beyond the legal reforms, there's also listening to us here, strategic platforms and collaboration. If every time CDD or GI came up with a report, we had a president and presidency that understood that it is time to engage. Let's have a strategic platform to ask them, what's the research showing? And how can we address this? Strategic platforms for engagement and collaboration between us and the police, between us and whichever other institution to get the results. I think that would be key. So we shouldn't have one side doing the research, the data is sitting, nobody is actually using that data to change things. How can we have much more effective strategic platforms and collaboration for results? I think that's key. I also think education, from before education, digitalization for anti-corruption. I liked my sister's from Peace Council story. And the thing in my mind is, we've been talking about digitalization now. How can technology work for us to make it easy and to deal with issues of corruption? And then education. I've seen that the Nordic countries that have very low corruption levels, they'll tell you that right from childhood, they begin to teach the children what are positive role models, the things you shouldn't do. To the extent that if their parents do it, they'll say, hey, and they may even report them. How do we change our curricula to make sure we have the behavior change and groom and nurture a generation that is very, very militant about these issues? I think that would be key. And then finally, citizen action. There's no way we'll get the results if we continue to point at those in public sector and do not point at ourselves. 9 out of 10 Ghanaians do not know their responsibilities under Article 41. And Article 41 is where the responsibilities of citizens should be. So what it means is we have 90% irresponsible citizens because we don't know our obligations and we are not fulfilling them. I think these are some of the things we should be thinking about to make progress.
Thank you very much. We go back to the audience, but before that, Doug, you prepared to share with us how some of these data will be able to ensure that even though most of the political parties have launched their manifestos, how do we make sure that these set priorities for the voting, the voting parties, how are we going to make informed voting decisions based on what they are presenting to us and then our expectations as the barometer has said. So if we have anyone who would want to ask a question or make a submission.
Hello. My name is Elizabeth Joyce Villas with Codeo. I've listened to all this, and if you lived in Ghana immediately after independence or before then and knew how life was, you weep for Ghana today. All we've said today with all the data supporting them are based on discipline. This country is a lawless country. We are lawless because those who make the law don't apply the law to themselves. The laws are made for others, not for them. A simple thing is, we are bashing at the police now. Yes, they deserve it. We have to talk about it. But fancy a young policeman coming into the police service with all the expectations of what he also wants to offer to the country. He arrests somebody for wrongdoing. And then the big man calls him, do you know who it is? Leave him. How would this policeman continue working? And this is the society in which we live today. What we are doing to ourselves as Ghanaians, I don't think Ghanaians are arrested in Europe when they go to Europe. The laws are there, the laws work, and they dare not break the law. Here we have the laws, but the laws don't work. Because those who should respect the law don't respect the law. If the law affects their kin, the member of their family, they know how to get the person out of it. And this is what has, set us back. What you just said was so apt, because we were talking about in Scandinavian countries, how we should go back and train our children today to be able to at least love their country and want to do the right thing for their country. Because if there's discipline, everybody will work. How can we appoint people, big men in big places or big women, give them cars, bungalows and all that? Are they working? The police we have today, the police protect the, the politicians. What are the basic jobs for policemen today? They are protecting guards for police, banks and whatnot. In the past, when you are on the street and there's anybody breaking the law, any policeman will stop and fix it. Now things are going wrong. A policeman will drive. He wants avenue to clear the road for me to go quickly. That is what is happening. Let's take noise making as a simple act. There's a law in this country. There shouldn't be noise, loud noise or whatever after 9 o'clock. There was a period for about 2 months. I see the environmental, I think they are responsible for noise making. They were on TV every Tuesday or so talking about the laws. We don't want to hear the laws. We want the laws to be effective. You hear noises, terrible noises made after 9 o'clock. Some run into midnight. Just 2 years ago, I was talking to one of the ministers. The lady said, I lived at Tema, and there was this Pentecostal church next to me. They make so much noise. I intervened, they told me I'm possessed by evil spirit. So the poor woman had to leave her house and move to Accra. So I said, if you, a minister, can't deal with it, then what about me? It happened to me. I went to the court. I put injunction on the church. I said, I lived here before you came in. And you are a squatter. They don't have a church, just squatting. But they all night, and all night, even if you are talking to your Holy Spirit or speaking in tongues, you don't do it in a microphone. It was in microphone till 3 a.m. You can't sleep. You stop them, they won't stop. I said, I'll go to the court. Because I came before, and I stopped them. Since then, at least I've had my peace. But at least what we are saying is, since no Ghanaian can travel outside and break the laws, because the laws are there. Look at 2 years ago, the British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, was driving under influence of alcohol. He was stopped by a simple policeman. He became the headlines. Look at what he did during the COVID. locked down whilst he was having a party, and that brought him down. And these are places where the laws are working. So if we're going to sit down and create ministers, create big men, pay them for them to sit in the comfort of their offices and not pay attention to what happens to the public, the masses, then this is the kind of generation or society we're going to have. It's really pathetic. But I think it should start from the children, as you said. There was civics education during our time. You will learn how to be a good citizen, what you give to your country and what you should expect from your country. But this country where we've reached, we only need God to come down.
Thank you.
My name is Ahmed Anderson. Tied into what Madam has said and what many have said, especially the laws, we all agree, we have them a lot in our books. The issue really is, are they working? And tie into corruption and other related issues that we have spoken about. My real question here would be, in the course of Afrobarometer's survey, has it come out as a question, maybe to general public or those who are interviewed, as to what is it that they think can be done, to ensure that the laws prescribe punishment and that these punishments are effective or are implemented? Or what is it that people are suggesting that we do to ensure that the laws and the punishment that the laws prescribe are actually applied for us to get a society that is disciplined and sanitized? Has it come across at all, or is this something that we can think of? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe Dr. Salome, you prepare that question for us. Please.
Okay. Hello. My name is Nana Ousu. I support wholeheartedly what the lady of Kodeo is saying. Okay. My name is Nana Ousu. I support wholeheartedly what the lady from Kodeo is saying. What Mr. Adams said about too much power in the executive, I don't think the problem is that there's too much power. I think the problem is that the people who are appointed to positions don't have enough principles. Because it's not about being neutral or partisan. It's about being impartial and principled in the actions that you take for the office that you've been appointed to. And so we really need to ask ourselves, why is it that you can appoint somebody, they go somewhere, and they take decisions which are not even politically interesting for their party, but more interesting for their own personal aggrandizement. I don't want to mention names, but then there was this issue about the swimming pool that's meant to be the cathedral. And some people were asked this question. It is at a standstill. Why are people still being paid for it? And a person who I had so much respect for gave us a very wishy-washy answer. And the question is this: if you work somewhere and the job is not going on, why do you continue to collect money? Because you're not working. So why are you? It's not the issue of somebody telling you don't get paid. Why do you as a human being continue to collect the pay? And so the issue now is, how do we, maybe our generation is too late for us, but how do we get our children to learn civics, learn the issue of honesty, and so on, that when they come up, that they will not be swayed by all the different things. I ask myself, how come somebody in Finland or in Denmark or in Norway can decide that this is beneficial for the whole country or all my neighbors. And so because of that, I'm not going to do something wrong. And then we in Ghana, we rather are looking in terms of how many houses can I purchase, how many luxury cars can I buy, and then how can I show off. And when you see people who have been educated misbehaving and behaving in a form as if they had no education, excuse me to say, then it really is very painful. And it's difficult for me not to give examples, but then I'll not mention the name, but then it should help a bit. If you are the secretary to a very important person, and you or somebody in your family is getting married, and you decide to go to another country, and then rent expensive sports cars, and drive all around and come and put that on your Facebook, is that somebody who you consider to be Najunimudo? You know? And we see that all along around us. And it's very, very painful because as Ghanaians, we had a great start. And even if certain people don't like some of our leaders, almost everybody accepts that at least those initial leaders were thinking about Ghana. Now, I doubt that our leaders think about Ghana. They think about themselves. Thank you.
Behind. All right, thank you. My name is Matilda. Matilda Ayamga, I'm with NOSAC. I want to sound a bit impatient. Hearing our mothers and colleagues talking about what we can do to make sure that our parents, children, don't become like we are today. We are talking about the generation, which is perfectly fine. I'm wondering if we would want to also discuss immediate interim measures as stakeholders gathered here. Yes, we want to see the next 10 years being different. Let's start there. 20 years. How about today? I'm sure the purpose for this report and its dissemination to us is to reflect on what we can do together as stakeholders. We are here. NOSAC is a CSO. We engage in different interventions that have to bring people to the understanding of some of these issues. So in our own way, we'll do that. I know others are doing that. CDD is doing this and bringing us together. I think we should even look at what can we do tomorrow from this room. We can do that because we have a responsibility as CSOs to hold government accountable. But I see us reiterating the issues. We know. As for the examples, if we all want to share what happens to us on the road, when you are on the motorway and the police is, bringing maybe somebody, a big man, what they do to you, sometimes they don't even care if you fall in the gutter. And sometimes I'm wondering, where do I park? How do I move for you to pass? You are in traffic. They are not going through. So it's not for us to repeat the issues. We all know. When Mama was speaking, sorry, I didn't get your organization and name. We're all nodding. I was just looking through the room. Not all, but most of us were nodding because these are issues we all go through on a daily basis. But that is not what we are doing. We are just repeating. We are probably saying, okay, this report has even captured less. There's even more. But we want to look at what can we do from today. And the media... Sorry. No, I'm just saying the media is here. I'm laughing because my brother he repeatedly asked, what have we done? What have we done? And when Aunt Mary was counting up to about 6, I was alerting him to listen. And I said that we could count more. Just not for him as a person, but for that institution. And we all know that when we say men are not good, it might just be a few men. So we're not talking about the personalities, but maybe a few in that industry that are doing what is not helping all of us. So I'm saying, what can we do together? How can the media, for instance, that has that big weapon, help us to disseminate some of this information? You go there for time slot for a discussion, and then they're like, oh, this political party is having an engagement, and they are paying huge. You just have probably a budget of 300 cedis or something to discuss something that is very significant. But because you don't have money, sometimes CSOs or CBOs in the community do not have money. But we are not interested in that. So for me, can we look at a roadmap from here? This is the reality that is hitting us. What can we do? Nosak, you are in this part. This is how we collaborate. I think I'm really curious to know how we can move from today beyond just thinking about 5-10 years later. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Very brief.
Yes, before I became a journalist, I was an immigration officer. At the time, the passport office was at the Ministry of Health, under the tree. And you just go to the post office and go and purchase your passport form at 1 cedi. Then you come up there, we vet you, and then we give you a receipt to come back in 8 weeks for your passport. Now we're there one day, they said biometric. So then the biometric is the purpose was to address 2 issues. The first one was to do away with the Guru boys, and then the second one is to rake in the revenue that immigration and foreign affairs are missing. Now the biometric form came and it was 4, back, front, middle, and then front. Then the Guru boys said, yes, this is it for us. The ordinary applicant cannot fill the form. They will go to the Guru boy, they will fill it, and then they will come upstairs. One of the things I realized as an immigration officer was the fact that you can have a fake document but still get an authentic passport. So for me, the institutions, some of the institutions are just placed deliberately to be corrupt. And all the pillars that build those institutions make corruption very easy. Auntie Mary, in your work for many years, would you buy what I am saying? And if it is true, like she's saying, how do we ensure that because now Shelley goes and says, the passports are there, so many, come and collect it and all that. They have 4 passports in a year. Because you go, the process is not coming, a Guru boy will take it, they will do it for you from the same office. Yeah, from the same office. How much? 800 Ghana cedis, they'll pay you. And the passport will come. And so the fact that it's now biometric or not, that issue of raking in more revenue and doing away with Guru boy defeated. It was a vain pursuit from the beginning. So this issue about corruption, and from the job that I've done as a journalist going 2 decades, like we go around it. And for me, some of the institutions deliberately put in structures to ensure that the corruption goes on perfectly, and they all turn a blind eye to the matter.
Well, I'm going to respond to the question of what structures we need to put in place to correct some of the ills that we always encounter based on the comment from the man by Mrs. Villas. A simple answer I will give is that, in fact, when you look at Afrobarometer data, there is this particular question we used to ask. We started in round 3. What people think when maybe influential persons commit crime, as against when an ordinary person commits crime. I think we break off asking that question in round 4, 5, and 6, and we started again in round 7. And the general trend has been that Ghanaians believe when you are influential and you commit crime, you will walk out easily. But when you are an ordinary citizen and you commit crime, you will end up where you don't want to be. So for me, if we want systems to work, and these are relatives, we see it, until we change these things and we make sure whether you are an ordinary person or influential person, crime is crime. You will pay for your crime unless we change that. Because if we don't change that, this mindset will continue, and therefore it will also empower the influential. When they commit crime, they know where to go, what to pay, to offer, and walk out. But when you, the ordinary person, you commit that crime, you are doomed. And I think that is the problem. We need to. And I'm happy some of the issues also coming up. Like Mrs. Villa said, some of us, we are not grown, but we also saw some few things. I have been telling colleagues and friends that at times when I sit back and I reflect that one day I will die and I will leave my keys in this.
is a big worry to me. We need to do something about this situation. We need to do something about it. I have had several experiences where even dealing with institution, the institution itself was encouraging me to pay bribe. And at the end of the day, the service I was looking for, I decided to forget it. Use my own means to do whatever I want to do because I wasn't prepared to pay. And these are some of the things. I remember it was a serious issue. The officer I was dealing with was even telling me, where you stay, the senior person in charge of this office stays close to you. Can you go to his house? And I asked the person, did I pay for the services in the house of the man, or I pay for the services in this office? Why should I go to him in the house? And that was the end. They refused to offer me that service, and I decided not to follow up again. So we have a whole lot of structures that are not helping us to do the right thing. For instance, the passport situation you were alluding to. I have been saying this. When they started this biometric, you go to the passport office when you want to take the picture, about 2 machines, taking pictures for 5,000 people a day. What is the end result? Those who don't want to stay for long will pay. And so we create the structures, and the structures enable corruption perfectly. Like she said, you can't find your way through unless you pay. And I think these are some of the things as a country we need to think through. We need to do something about it. The indiscipline is too much, way too much in this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this has been very fruitful and engaging. Before we get to Doc to give us how all these things can inform the policies and the frameworks, and then our lady from NOSAC, maybe just to add a bit on it as a concluding remark, I think these issues are tools for us as CSOs to demand better for certain accountability. So the Afrobarometer is amplifying the voices of the people down there, the people we cannot go to hear them. So I think it is a tool that we know how to be able to say that this is happening. I mean, we are saying it. As you said, there are more there. How do we make sure that we are innovative in a way, we are demanding accountability in a way that policymakers or the people who must be accountable will hear and also work on that. So when Doug is done with how we make sure these decisions and scientific data are put into the policies, we will get brief concluding remarks from all the panelists, and then we can make an end to the day.
So to answer that question truthfully, I'm at a loss as to what needs to be done in terms of how data like this can inform policy making. You know, and I say that because the Afrobarometer data is publicly available. Every week they have an infographic of the week. They produce all manner of papers, things like that. Ghana Statistical Services, for example, under the current leadership, has all these data sets on all kinds of information about Ghanaians, the economy, access to services, school attendance, and all of that. So the data is there, it's readily available, it's easily accessible these days. What seems to be missing is the fact that there's I don't know if it's a cultural disposition or those who advocate for the use of data and statistics to inform policy, it is viewed as too much of an academic exercise, right? That in the everyday conduct of politics, that perhaps these things have sort of a limited role. And yes, there are a lot of things that go into making policy decisions. Critical data is one of it. But at the end of the day, I think we need more voices. We need more advocates. A lot more people need to shine light on the existence of some of this information and what it is actually saying. I mean, you would get into debates of, you watch, after today, you would get into debates of, well, what was the sample size? And does it represent all Ghanaians? Things like that, right? You hear that every time. I don't have those arguments anymore. What I say is, regardless of some of the concerns you may have, how do you look at Afrobarometer and other data sources as even signals of the things we need to pay attention to. For me, my concluding remark is there also seems to be some resilience in the system, right? That institutional change, I don't know how you move it forward. And my clear example is with the Electoral Commission, for example. So I remember after round 6 Afrobarometer, I did a post on Facebook about the declining trust in the EC and said, we need to pay attention because this is a critical institution for one of our critical dimensions of the democracy architecture. This year, most of the media engagements and interviews that I've granted around the EC, trust continues to be the issue, right? So a decade later, we are still having conversations about trust in the Electoral Commission. We are still having conversations about trust in institutions that make democracy work. So part of the task now is more voices, more advocates for all of this data. And I would even, tout that we need more advocates, particularly for the Afrobarometer, because it continues to be the only instrument that actually captures directly the voices of citizens. And that, for me, is the clearest signal when your citizens are saying, we think corruption is growing, we don't trust your institutions. But it can't be the same group of people always saying this is a good thing to use for reflection or to inform policy. More advocates are needed for some of these important data sources.
Thank you. So for me, concluding, I think from where Matilda spoke, there is a need for action now. Action now. Then we will be thinking about the generations that are coming after us, because they seem to be even more prone to corruption, and they are, in fact, very interested in some of the behaviors that the older generation is perpetrating, and it's worrying. So for me, I believe that we need to change the narrative to ensure that going forward, our children and the children after them would want to do the right thing. I believe the Nordic countries we are talking about didn't start enjoying the benefits they are now just like that. They have also gone through the process. And so this is that process. And there would be the point of implosion where we all need to come to that reality. I believe that is now, that we can no longer exist the way we are. We can no longer accept corrupt behavior the way it is practiced. And we all live in it and agree that, okay, it's all right. When we begin to reject and denounce some of these behaviors and publicly speak about them, when we begin to make the data available, accessible, and also in shapes and formats that people understand and communicate to them. So for instance, the corruption narrative. Ghana is corrupt. 5 billion is taken by a few people. My uncle sitting in the village doesn't understand what you are talking about. But then if I say that the money that the big people are chopping out of corruption can build school, can give about 20 of our communities healthcare facilities, then they would understand. So our narrative and advocacy must also then inform and make people rise to speak against the phenomena. And to you on the issue of bureaucracy, you see, the proponents of bureaucracy had in mind that if they put in place process, then policies would be shaped, and the narrative that people who by nature would want to flout rules would not have that opportunity. It's why bureaucracy is in place. Bureaucracy is not there to ensure that it stifles innovation and initiative. No. But that is what we are doing. But then remember that when the subject of the Karl Marx's and others, Max Weber's, who started this process, they wanted to ensure that because as humans we would want to do the wrong thing, they put in place process so that we do not do so. And as we have grown, technology has come to facilitate this. You sit at home and you go online and apply for something and it's sent to you, again in the Nordic countries. It's done so fluidly. That is where we want to go to. And so if you have challenges and you keep mute and say, oh, that is how things are done, if I go and talk about it, they will say I am too known. Then it means you are encouraging that behavior to thrive. So please, wherever we find ourselves, let us remember that the change we want only begins if we take the initiative and begin to reject some of these behaviors at whatever cost it is. If we want to say that, oh, if they talk about me, I don't like that, I'll lose my job, and so then it continues. The cycle continues. So I would want to say that data is for a purpose. Let us utilize the data for that purpose, and let's ensure that this democracy, this novel one we want to practice, does not only shine through when it comes to elections, but then shows forth that we are participating, we are practicing all the principles of our democracy. And then everyone around the world will begin to also say that, oh, when it comes to Ghana, we are doing a good job. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me first start by clarifying a point I made earlier on excessive executive powers. I thank my senior brother. You're absolutely right that we need principled people to get the results we want. In Ghana, one of the things we've noticed is that a government comes into place, and for the next 2 years, we are appointing board members, chief executives, and what have you. Because the executive has that power, according to the Constitution, meritocracy is not being promoted in many of these institutions. And the people there believe that I have my job because of the president and the people around him. And so the decisions they take too don't tend to be objective and independent enough. We need to do something about that, and that's the context. I like to say that as anti-corruption people, we say, see something, say something, and do something. Now we have gone beyond just say something. We are saying do something. And do something means hold hands with other people. We're talking about the actions we can take now. Hold hands with other people around you when you see something corrupt is going on. Because from power analysis, we realize that when we act as individuals, we don't get the results. But if we're able to hold hands with other people, our voice is louder, we're able to overcome the obstacles. So let's identify other like-minded citizens, Ghanaians who believe in what we want to see done, and make sure we are working with them to get the change we want. And you can report through ALAC. Let me promote ALAC of GII. You have an issue, don't think you can handle it. They have some lawyers there, they have some people there who can take it up. So let's get the number. What's the phone number?
0800 125.
One more time.
0800 125.
Thank you very much.
Go online and just type I paid a bribe, or you go to the Eye on Corruption. Eye on Corruption is your best bet. Just report. And if you want us to take action on it, please leave your details on and the coordinator will reach out to you. The next steps, you will be amazed. Very professional. Confidential as well.
Thank you very much. In ethical leadership, we say, know what is right, do what is right, and influence those in your circle of influence to do what is right. Know what is right. Ghanaians like to talk without reading enough. Please go back and read Article 41 and understand that the Constitution empowers citizens to do citizens' arrest, to protect the property of the state. Understand who you are under the Constitution. Know what is right, do what is right, and influence others to do the same. Finally, do not be corrupt yourself. We are sitting here, but some of us are corrupt. Do not be corrupt yourself. Don't influence others to be corrupt, and act when you see corruption. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, panelists. Thank you very much, everyone. This brings us to the... Please. Okay, thank you for coming through anyways. So thank you, everyone, for your engagement. This has been fruitful. And as we have mentioned, this is just the beginning of some of these conversations. It's just the first step towards making sure the people's voices are being amplified, and then we are also demanding accountability and also making sure that systems are built, the trust is restored, and then we move forward as a nation. So thank you once again for having me moderate the session. My name is Joyce Nyami from the Youth Build Foundation, and thank you very much, our panelists, for coming through to discuss this with us.